You're listening to Cornerstone West Los Angeles.
Let me read to you Luke chapter 11, verses 29 through 36. If you'd like to follow along, it is on page 870 of the Red Pew Bible in front of you. It'll also be on the screen behind me. Here's what it says. When the crowds were increasing, Jesus began to say, "This generation is an evil generation. It seeks for a sign, but no sign will be given to it except the sign of Jonah. For as Jonah became a sign to the people of Nineveh, so will the Son of Man be to this generation. The Queen of the South will rise up at the judgment with the men of this generation and condemn them, for she came from the ends of the earth to hear the wisdom of Solomon, and behold, something greater than Solomon is here. The men of Nineveh will rise up at the judgment with this generation and condemn it, for they repented at the preaching of Jonah, and behold, something greater than Jonah is here. No one, after lighting a lamp, puts it in a cellar or under a basket, but on a stand, so that those who enter may see the light. Your eye is the lamp of your body. When your eye is healthy, your whole body is full of light. But when it is bad, your body is full of darkness. Therefore be careful lest the light in you be darkness. If then your whole body is full of light, having no part dark, it will be wholly bright, as when a lamp with its rays gives you light." This is the word of the Lord. Now we're in a series. We're going through the book of Luke. And sometimes when you go through a book, the way we're doing it, you get to passages like these where you need to remember the passages that came before it if you want to understand it. And that's what's happened. It's like 2 verses ago in the Bible, but it's like 7 days ago for us. So who knows what we have up and running. This section begins with Jesus performing a pretty astounding miracle. There's a mute man, and he'd been rendered mute by a demon. So Jesus exorcises the demon, shows this astounding power, and the crowd has a variety of reactions to this. This is back in verses 14, 15, 16. Some of them were amazed, but some of them refused to be amazed. One group of them said, Jesus is actually just using demonic power to exorcise these demons, to perform these miracles. We dealt with that last week. But then another group, it says, to test him, kept seeking from him a sign from heaven. And so this group is the people who were, they're skeptical. They're asking for more evidence. Jesus, show me a sign. And that's the group Jesus is addressing here in the passage today. And it's pretty amazing, actually, because this is exactly what the average person in our city would ask Jesus if they somehow saw him on the street. The average person in Los Angeles, if they saw Jesus, whoa, I'm so glad you're here. Been meaning to talk to you. They'd say, you want me to believe in you. All these Christians want me to believe in you. They keep saying you're the only way to God. What sign? What evidence will you give me? How will you prove it? That you are who you say you are, that I should put my trust in you. Well, we get the answer here. He actually answers that question. And here's his answer. His answer is, you already have enough evidence. Now, that's a challenging answer. It's also a profound answer. And it gives us a pretty deep look into our own hearts as we respond to Jesus Christ. And because here's what this passage is about. It's about unbelief. Why do so many people not believe in Jesus Christ? Why do so many people, disbelieve? Why do they find the evidence not compelling? Some of you, you've talked to people and you've presented all this evidence, all these reasons, and they're unpersuaded. Some of you here are saying, I'm here for evidence. I'm here for signs. In this passage, Jesus takes up that idea of lack of belief, unbelief, and he teaches us the condition, the cause, and the cure for unbelief. He teaches the condition, what is it? The cause, where does it come from? And the cure. What do you do when you find it at work in your own heart? And I tell you, we need to pay attention. If you're here and you've had this question, pay attention. He's answering it right now. your very question. If you're here and you're saying, I'm a believer. Nevertheless, I tell you, if you're paying attention, you're going to find some of this still exists in your own heart. And therefore, this is for everybody. So, first of all, the condition. What is unbelief? Well, these people are seeking a sign, and Jesus says, this is an evil generation. No sign will be given except the sign of Jonah. Believe it or not, immediately you learn something, and that's this. Unbelief is different than doubt. Because Jesus here is condemning unbelief. And the Bible universally condemns unbelief. The Bible does not universally condemn doubt. Jesus regularly and happily meets people in their doubts. And so, some people, they confuse doubt and unbelief. They're actually different, and you see it here. The most famous doubter, for example, is Thomas, doubting Thomas, the disciple. Here's the story. Jesus dies. He rises from the grave. The disciples are together. They're having a meeting, and Jesus shows up. And he shows them himself. It's me. I'm back. I've been raised from the dead. Thomas missed the meeting. It goes to show you, don't miss church. And what he says to the disciples is, I'm not going to believe you unless I see the holes in his hands from the nails of the cross, unless I touch the holes in his side, from the spear. I'm not going to believe you. And then, Thomas doesn't miss the rest of the meetings, and Jesus shows up again. And Jesus does not look at Thomas and say, how dare you? No sign for you. You're an evil generation. He doesn't say that. He says, Thomas, come here. And he shows him the holes. He says, touch the hole in my side. He's very tender with Thomas's doubts. And then he says, Thomas, do not disbelieve, but believe. He says, Thomas, it's time to stop doubting. It's time to start believing. Now, that is a nuanced approach towards doubt. Because here's what it says. Jesus is incredibly tender towards people who doubt, and yet he's always moving them towards deeper, further belief. In the Bible, doubt is a little bit like hunger. Hunger is this uncomfortable sign that you need to seek some physical nourishment, you need to seek food. Doubt is very similar in that it's this uncomfortable spiritual sign that you need to go find truth, that somehow your understanding of God is too compressed. It needs to be expanded. You need answers to your questions. Doubt can take you higher up and further in. Doubt it's not, Jesus is very tender with doubt. Unbelief is a different condition than doubt. Jesus does not condemn doubt. He does here condemn, pretty unilaterally, unbelief. And you say, what's the difference? Well, I'll tell you, then I'll show you. Here's the difference. Doubt is a question. Unbelief is a demand. Doubt brings Jesus uncertainties. Unbelief brings Jesus ultimatums. And doubt in that sense is kind of a lack of something. Doubt is a lack of certainty. But unbelief is the presence of something. It's the presence of something in the heart that will never be satisfied, no matter how much evidence it gets, no matter how well-reasoned the arguments are, no matter what it sees. And that's what this first half of the passage is all about. These people ask for a sign. You say, what's wrong with that? Well, one hint you get that something's wrong is that if you go back to that previous passage, they ask for a sign immediately after seeing a sign. So they see something miraculous, something inexplicable, an amazing amount of power that gives loving freedom to this man, and they say, show me evidence. And so immediately you say, well, something might be broken in the way they're receiving the evidence that's in front of them. And that wasn't the only sign, by the way. The end of the Gospel of John, John says, I could only write so much of this down. He says, if you were to write everything Jesus did down, all the miracles, all the signs, the world isn't a big enough library to hold all the books. And so what you get in the gospel accounts is actually a very small selection of the kind of public miracles, the public ministry of Jesus Christ. Jesus isn't reluctant to give evidence, but they're clearly reluctant to believe it. And he brings up these two Old Testament stories. One is the Ninevites. That's the story of Jonah. You go back into your Old Testament, there's a very small book, only 4 chapters, about a very reluctant prophet named Jonah, who's called to go to a very cruel city called Nineveh. A lot of oppression, a lot of evil. And Jonah doesn't go to Nineveh, he goes the other way. Ends up on a ship, and God says, you need to actually go to Nineveh, and sends a storm for Jonah's sin. And the sailors realize this is Jonah's fault, so they throw him in the water. And Jonah says, yes, this is my fault, throw me in the water. Storm stops, and Jonah sinks down to the depths, gets swallowed up in the belly of a giant fish, is as good as dead. And then 3 days later, the fish, spits him out on land, essentially in the direction of Nineveh. And Jonah goes to Nineveh, and he gives them what is probably the worst gospel presentation on record in Scripture. It's like 7 words. Yet 40 days and Nineveh will be judged. Like that's the message. I'll see ya. And believe it or not, the Ninevites repent. They say, they look around from the king on down. They say, we have to turn from our evil ways. And if God looks, maybe he will relent. Maybe he will show us forgiveness. And he does. This is the story of Jonah and the Ninevites. Then he brings up the queen of the south. This is a story from 1 Kings in the Old Testament. Solomon was an ancient Israelite king, and God goes to Solomon and he says, I want to bless you. What would you like me to bless you with? And Solomon says, wisdom. I need wisdom to be a king. So God gives him incredible wisdom. The queen of the south, known as the Queen of Sheba here, is an East African queen. She hears about Solomon, his wisdom, his kingdom, and travels thousands of miles to see it for herself. She arrives, and it actually says in 1 Kings 10, she arrived and she tested him with hard questions. She didn't quite believe it. And then he answers her beyond her expectations. She sees the blessings that God has poured on this kingdom, and she says, I didn't believe it at first, but I didn't hear the half of it. Blessed be the Lord your God. These 2 stories. Now, why is he telling these stories? What you have in these stories are an individual and a group of people who have very little to go on, very little evidence, very little proof of who God is. They're not set up to believe, and yet, when the evidence they do get, they look at it, they test it, and they say, it's good. And they come to a deep and a confident belief in the God that sent that evidence to them. And Jesus says, it's these people who are going to rise up and judge this generation. In other words, when history's over and Jesus is coming to judge, these people will be right next to that generation. They'll kind of be, here we all are together, in the grand resurrection. Who knows what it's going to look like? And they're going to say, there wasn't enough evidence. He didn't show me enough signs. And I'll look over and I'll see the Queen of Sheba, and she'll go, oh, that's really too bad. I went 1,000 miles to go hear from Solomon. Who did you go to see? Like, well, we didn't go anywhere. He came to us. Who came to you? Well, the guy on the throne. Oh, okay. Well, maybe there was enough evidence for you then. Do you see? Same with the Ninevites. I got an 8-word sermon. Well, Jesus gave me the Sermon on the Mount. I didn't like it. At some level, the condition of unbelief is one such that you're always looking for proof, but it's never enough. Now look, a skeptical person has every right to ask questions, has every right to get answers to those questions, every right to explore and see what Jesus has to say and weigh that for themselves. And Jesus overwhelms people with evidence. He's not stingy, he's happy to give it. But unbelief, it's not a problem of evidence. That's not the condition. Unbelief trumps all evidence. One commentator put it, unbelief swallows up all the evidence and says, I'm still hungry. Jesus is saying here, I could give you all the signs in the world and it wouldn't make a difference. You still wouldn't believe. Or, Peter Atkins, the famous atheist, he was in a debate, with a Christian over the existence of God and Jesus Christ, and kept saying, there's not enough evidence. The arguments aren't good enough. There's not enough proof. And eventually his debate partner looked back and said, if the stars all of a sudden went out of alignment and in the sky they spelled, Peter, this is God, believe in me, it's about time. Peter, if God showed up himself and looked you in the eye and said, ask me anything, I'll give you all the answers, believe in me, it's about time, would you believe? And he sort of paused and he said, no, I think I was going crazy. Now, that's the condition of unbelief. It asks for evidence, says not enough evidence, but no evidence will ever really be good enough. That's the condition. Now, what's the cause? Where does it come from? The second, and it sounds enigmatic, there's like light and then lamps and then cellars and then more light and then darkness. The eye's a lamp, there's another lamp, there's a bunch of things going on, but it's actually very simple. Basically, Jesus is saying this, you need 2 things to see. 1, you need enough light. If it's dark, you can't see. And 2, you need working eyes. There can be all the light in the world, but if your eyes aren't working, you won't be able to see. Now, unbelief says it's caused by a lack of light. There's not enough light, not enough evidence. We need more convincing arguments, that kind of thing. But Jesus is saying the cause is different. He says, the light of God's existence, of Jesus Christ's identity, it's not hidden under a barrel, he says. It's not in a cellar. God has not left himself without a witness. That's how Paul puts it. We went through a lot of the evidence for God's existence and reality like back in the fall, and that was only 35 minutes. There's much more. And Jesus has performed miracles out in the open. His ministry is very public. He's put himself on display. He's let himself be asked questions. He's given responses. Jesus says the cause of unbelief lies not in how much evidence there is, but in how well we see it. In other words, it's not a light problem, it's a sight problem. Unbelief isn't caused by a lack of light, it's caused by a sight issue. Now, what does he mean? Well, on the one hand, the Bible is far more complex and realistic about unbelief and belief than we are. The Bible understands that for human beings, it's always more belief and unbelief, faith and lack of faith. It's always more than just an objective look at the evidence that leads to these places. Our eyes get clouded very easily as human beings. For example, there's a whole discipline called the sociology of knowledge. And it basically boils down to one conclusion, which is you find beliefs more plausible if people you want to like you believe them. You say, that's kind of strange, but think about it for a moment. You're raised in a devoutly religious home. You go off to a very big-time university, and you get there, and all the sophisticated people, all the TAs, all the professors, all the ones ahead of you in their major, all the ones you want to be like, all the people in the club you want to be in, they look down their nose at people who believe in those sorts of things. They look down their nose at religious believers. And then, you read an article online, you read a short book, and you come home and you say, I've reconsidered the arguments. I no longer believe. I think differently now. And look, there are arguments on both sides. But don't you see, it's more than just your intellect at work in that situation. There's more going on. Or personal experience. You might have, right now, a Loctite understanding of how God's existence squares with the existence of suffering in the world. You might feel like you can cross every T and dot every I, but when that suffering isn't just in the world, but it comes into your life, you read an article, you have a conversation, you say, I've reconsidered the arguments. I no longer believe, I've changed my mind. I see it differently now. Now look, there are arguments on both sides, but don't you see, it wasn't just your intellect at work there. Unbelief, faith, and lack of faith are connected to larger things than just a neutral weighing of the evidence. There's so many factors involved. And yet even deeper, Jesus says, there's an evil in us. It's an evil generation. Our eyes are not healthy. And that's the idea of the eye as a lamp. Again, it sounds confusing, but it's saying a healthy eye, a functioning eye, is the kind that has the light outside of it able to enter so that you can see. In that sense, the eye is the lamp of the body. It's the thing that allows light outside to shine on the inside. And so if you have a light going through your eye, you can act appropriately. You can navigate a room. So to have this kind of light is, not to be living in darkness. Practically, personally, emotionally, relationally, socially. And Jesus says, there's an evil in you. In other words, a rebellion against God. That's a part of your makeup in your natural state. He says, what you need is a healthy eye. The word healthy means sincere. And therefore, a sick eye is one that won't let light in because it isn't sincerely looking. It's got mixed motives. See, the minute you look closely at this, the way we're looking at the evidence always is going to have mixed motives. Because when it comes to this issue, we all have a dog in the fight. We're never neutral about this issue. How could you be? You read an account of ancient Greek wars, and you're not sitting around going, well, I very much care, how the Trojans fought this. You're not sitting around thinking that. You're kind of like, it's interesting. It could be right, could be wrong. I'm not entirely sure. When you read the account of Jesus Christ, everything's at stake. Because if he is who he says he is, you've lost entire control of your life. You have to cede everything to him. You're accountable to him with everything you do. He has to become the ultimate North Star in your life. You are no longer in control of your own life. Of course you have a dog in the fight. Of course you have mixed motives. You can never come to the Bible without that. And so you see, Thomas Nagel put it this way. He's an atheist philosopher. He said, everyone has a cosmic authority problem, including himself. And he said, he wrote in a book called The Last Word. He says, I speak from experience, being strongly subject to this myself. I want atheism to be true, and am made uneasy by the fact that some of the most intelligent and well-informed people I know are religious believers. It isn't just that I don't believe in God and naturally hope that I'm right in my belief. It's that I hope there is no God. I don't want there to be a God. I don't want the universe to be like that. My guess is that this cosmic authority problem is not a rare condition, and that it's responsible for much of the scientism and reductionism of our time. It's a somewhat ridiculous situation because it's just as irrational to be influenced by the hope that God doesn't exist as to be influenced by the hope that God does exist. That is honest. It's incredibly honest because unbelief typically convinces itself that it's a light problem. The problem's with the light. It's too dim. There's not enough evidence. Arguments aren't convincing. Now, we need evidence. We need arguments. It's not just a blind faith being a Christian. But Jesus says the problem with unbelief runs deeper than that. There's a problem under the problem. You have a cosmic authority problem, and it's going to be at work underneath everything else. If a judge was presiding over a case, and the defendant is the owner of a company, and the judge's entire life savings were wrapped up in that owner's company, so that if that defendant is guilty, the judge goes bankrupt. We would be mildly afraid of bias, yes? We wouldn't let him, he has to recuse himself. But don't you see, every one of us in our natural state, that's how you come to the Bible. That's how you come to Jesus. Everything at stake. Back in earlier in Luke, the last time, 2 times ago, Jesus used the phrase, this generation, which is somewhat rare in the book of Luke. He does it in regards to unbelief as well. Matt preached on it. It was back in last summer. And he says, this generation, you don't believe, you're like kids in a marketplace. We play a happy song, you won't dance. In other words, back then, kids in the marketplace had one of 2 games. You either played wedding or funeral, so they're a happy game or a sad game. And it's like a bunch of kids are going, hey, let's play a wedding. We'll play a happy song. And some other kids in the corner are going, nah, it's too happy. All right, how about we play a funeral and do a sad song? Nah, it's too sad. At some point, you realize it's not about the tune. It's about the fact that they're not in charge of it. And this is true with kids across the board. If you ever have experience with children who are throwing tantrums, you realize very quickly, you cannot reason a child out of a tantrum because reason isn't how they got into it. So a kid says, I'm not eating these vegetables, I'll never do it. And they storm off, and you say, well, look, vegetables are healthy for you. I don't want to be healthy. Okay. Vegetables, are going to make you grow. I want to be this height the rest of my life. Okay. Sometimes you just kind of throw in the towel and you go, okay, you want ice cream instead? And you know what you will hear sometimes? I kid you not. I don't like ice cream. You go, okay, well, both of us know that's not true. What's going on in that moment? It's not about what you're giving them. It's about control. I will turn down ice cream if it means I'm in charge of my own life. Now, if that can happen with kids and parents, can't it happen with grown-ups and God? Where what happens in unbelief is going to God and saying, whatever you say, whatever you offer, whatever you give, I will remain in control of my own life. And don't you think that skews your eye? Don't you think you don't see quite right if that's part of your motivation? This is what he's saying is the cause. And he gives a warning here. He says, be careful, lest the light in you be darkness. What he's saying in there is there's a way of succumbing to unbelief so much that you begin to look at the darkness in you and say, this is actually light. There's a kind of pride that says, I am the sole arbiter of what's true and false. I'm the sole arbiter of what's right and wrong. No one can tell me different. And if that leads to misery, it will always be someone else's fault. C.S. Lewis wrote a book called The Great Divorce. It's a story about heaven and hell. And basically, it's a field trip from hell to heaven. And all the people in hell get off and they see people in heaven who they knew. And the people they know come to them and they invite them one by one. Come join me. And you know what they all say? No. Because that would mean I'm wrong. And I'm never wrong. You've got it wrong. There's an old saying, hell is locked from the inside. You think you understand hell? You got to realize that no one's ever trying to get out. They're convinced. And nothing will change their mind. It's always someone else's fault. Or look at, there's a parable Jesus tells, I think a little bit after this, Lazarus and the rich man. Lazarus is a poor man, and he lives outside, he basically sleeps outside of a rich man's house in ancient Israel. And the rich man oppresses him, abuses him, gives him no thought. And when it's all said and done, the rich man ends up in hell, and he sees Lazarus in heaven. And the rich man does not say, you know what? I wish I could go over there with you. You know what he says? Send Lazarus over here to give me a drop of water. I'm uncomfortable. I deserve a servant over here. That's hell. There's a way unbelief can grow such that you never escape it. It eclipses anything else. The cause of unbelief can metastasize in your soul until nothing anyone says, nothing anyone shows you, nothing anyone does will ever be enough because you will be right. The cause of unbelief, Jesus says, is not lack of evidence. It's not a lack of good reasons to believe. Now look, some people haven't heard the evidence. Some of you here might be going, whoa, whoa, whoa. If you haven't heard, if you're here to explore, you're welcome. Jesus is tender with you. He wants to show you. But unbelief isn't a light problem. Informed unbelief is a sight problem. It's the presence of that desire to maintain control, to be the arbiter, to be right and everyone else is wrong, to maintain a reason to keep yourself in control of your own life, even if it requires intellectual gymnastics to do it. That isn't unbelief, but unbelief has a cause and it goes deep. Now, what's the cure? What do you do when you see it in yourself? You might look at the passage and go, I don't see one in here. I get that. It's a difficult passage in that way, but you know what? There are hints here. One, Jesus says, be careful. Be careful lest the light in you be darkness. In other words, there is yet hope. And two, he holds out a promise in that last verse, verse 36. If then your whole body is full of light, having no part dark, it will be wholly bright, as when a lamp with its rays gives you light. Even to these people, and therefore to all of us, he's saying there is a way to find yourself operating with less and less mixed motives, with clearer and clearer eyes, with less and less clutching over your own right to be the arbiter, and more openness to what reality has to say. And that can actually lead to your whole life being shot through with light. Light isn't just clarity, it's warmth. Your insides won't be dark and cold, they'll be warm, and you'll be able to navigate the world as it actually is. Now, how do you do something like that? How does that become a reality in your life? Let me give you a few ways to do this. One, you're going to have to begin to doubt your doubts, to be skeptical of your skepticism, to doubt your unbelief. You know, doubt is different than unbelief, but unbelief in your heart will leverage any doubt you have and try to bend it to its own cause. And therefore, you have to constantly be doubting your doubts. In other words, you know, people are always worried about blind faith. Very few people talk about blind skepticism, but I tell you it exists. It's very easy to be a blind skeptic. In other words, you know, have you actually looked at what the claims are? Have you really looked at the evidence? You have questions? I get it. I have questions. And yet, have you looked for answers? Or have you sort of thought about it for a while, maybe read a few things here and there on your own and gone, yeah, I think I'm probably right. At some point, that's not looking. That's not a lack of light. That's closing your eyes to the light that might be out there. You see, you have to, no blind skepticism. Doubt your skepticism. Be skeptical of your own skepticism. But even more, I have to be brief here, you can't say, well, I will not believe in Jesus until I can know with perfect certainty that he is who he says he is. Because you don't know not to believe in Jesus with perfect certainty. In other words, you can't test for God's existence, for God's non-existence, and you're betting your life either way. In other words, look, it's a leap of faith in every direction. Sheldon Van Auken wrote a conversion story called A Severe Mercy. And he said, what I saw was a gap between the possible, like what could be, and the proved. And how was I to cross that gap? If I was going to stake my whole life on the risen Christ, I wanted proof, certainty, letters of fire across the sky. I got nothing. But then I realized there was a gap behind me as well. I suddenly realized, of course, there would have to be a leap of faith because I couldn't prove that Christ was God, but I had no certainty or proof that he was not. And therefore, even to go back was a leap of faith. I could not reject Jesus without great faith. And when I realized it would take enormous faith to reject Jesus, I knew what to do. There was only one thing I could do. Once I saw the gap behind me, I flung myself over the gap before me towards Jesus. Now look, you might not agree with this conclusion, But whenever you say, I can't believe, where are you going to go? There's a gap behind you. You're going to have to believe in something. All of it is a leap of faith. And wherever that leap is, if it's not the Christian God, is it truer? Is it more beautiful? Is it better? You see, it's all a leap of faith. You have to doubt your doubt. You have to doubt your unbelief. Be skeptical of your skepticism. That's one. That's kind of a negative thing, right? You have to kind of deconstruct some of your skepticism. But second, you actually have to go to Jesus for eyes that work. Now, hear me out. Jesus is always healing blind people in the gospel accounts. Jesus heals lots of people. There's a disproportionate amount of stories of the blind getting sight. All those miracles actually happened. It's a metaphor for the human condition. We all need clear eyes. We need healthy eyes. Where are you going to go to get it? You can't go make it happen on your own. Like the blind people in these stories, you need to go to Jesus. So you can't go to him demanding proof. You have to go to him asking to see. And that's, the very first instance of unbelief in the Bible is in the book of Genesis. It's the very first sin. It's where Adam and Eve look at God and they say, essentially, not enough light. I want to be in control over my own life. I don't want to cede control to you. I want to do this on my own terms. So they take the fruit and they eat it. And immediately they begin to hide from God. And when God calls them out, you know what they say? They say, this is your fault. You didn't give me the right people. You didn't set it up right. Not enough light. There wasn't enough for me to go on. And at some point when you read the book of Genesis and that account, one of the things that the story leads you to do is to say, well, what should they have done instead? And what they should have done, very clearly, is not run away from him, but run to him. At some point, if you read the story with clear eyes, you realize what they should have done. They both should have come out from their hiding immediately and said, God, we broke ourselves. Like something went wrong, and we don't know how to fix it. And underneath all the bravado, we are really scared, and we're not sure what to do. And you are the only one we can think of who could possibly be able to help us. Would you please fix this? That's what they should have done. And what you and I can do with our unbelief is not run away from, but run to him and say, could you fix this? Now look, and at some level you might say, well, that's kind of, begging the question, isn't it? I ask you, why wouldn't you try? Why wouldn't you try this? If it really is this serious, if it's this significant of an issue, if you really are betting your life, why wouldn't you go to Jesus Christ and say, if you're there at all, would you help me see you? Would you help me get past anything clouding my vision? If you want me to see you, would you help me see you? Why wouldn't you go to him? If it's this serious. And by the way, Christians, take your doubt to Jesus Christ. Don't take your doubt to unbelief. Take your doubt to Jesus Christ. We all have doubts. It's very normal. It's very regular. And like we said earlier, Jesus is tender with your doubt. Go to him with it. Thomas goes to Jesus with doubt, and in a sense, Jesus comes to him. And that story ends with Thomas making what many scholars think is the pinnacle claim about Jesus Christ in the entire Gospel of John. Thomas says, my Lord and my God. Almost like all the things about Jesus were building to that one statement. How did he get there? Because he took his doubt to Jesus. And Jesus came and expanded his view of God so that his doubts left and belief came afterwards. And what belief? Take your doubts to Jesus Christ. Don't take it away from him. And see what he'll do with them to expand a cramped view of God, to expand what's happening in your soul and your life, to get you shot through with light. So you have to go to Jesus. Doubt your doubts. Go to Jesus and ask him to help you see. But then last, particularly, point your eyes towards the cross and the empty tomb. Jesus says in this passage, near the beginning, something's greater than here. Something better than Jonah. A prophet that doesn't run away from you, but runs to you. A prophet that doesn't give you 8 words, but gives you all sorts of words. A prophet that doesn't hate you, but loves you. There's something better than Solomon. A king that isn't just a little bit wise, but is wisdom itself. Someone that doesn't make the queen travel all the way to here, but travels all the way to you. There's something greater is here. But he says in the very beginning, it's really fascinating. This generation gets no sign except the sign of Jonah, which is just beautiful and staggering because it means this generation gets no sign except the best sign. No sign except the best sign, because what's the sign of Jonah? Jonah goes into the belly of the whale. He goes down into the depths as he's good as dead because of his own sin. He's dragged all the way down. And then he comes back up and is spit out back on land, resurrected as it were, and goes and tells a godless people that they have hope, that they can come back to God, that he will forgive them. And they enter into a whole new kind of life that they could never have found on their own. Well, you know what Jesus does? is on the cross. He gets thrown into the depths. He goes all the way down, not into the sea, but into the grave. And he does it not because of someone else's sin, or not because of his own sin, but because of yours. It buries him. And then 3 days later, he comes back and he appears to people with doubts like Thomas. He says, look at my hands, touch my side. Do not disbelieve, but believe, because I have come back to open the door for godless people, sinful people, people with unbelieving hearts even, to turn from their unbelief and be restored to God in a way they never could get on their own. And their desperate attempts at control, it would leave them hollowed out. But what I'm here to do is to leave them shot through with light. I'm here to heal your eyes. If unbelief is ever going to be dealt with, you don't just need more evidence. You do need reasons, yes, but it's not all you need. You need to know what kind of God is showing you that evidence. What kind of God is asking you for that kind of allegiance? What kind of God could give you clear eyes? What would happen if you did? And it's the kind of God that gives you, says, I'm not giving you a sign except the best sign. The kind of God that says, I would love you enough to get thrown into the depths for you. And I would come fix you. He says, come out from your hiding. Look to me and say, can you fix me? Underneath all the bravado, I'm scared. And he says, I will meet you with tenderness. I'll meet you with the sign of Jonah. A few verses ago, Jesus said, ask and you will find. Or ask and you will receive, seek and you will find, He's saying, if you seek him without a hidden agenda, you will find him. Do you want to find him? He's there to be found. Go to him and see what happens. He might give you a life that's shot through with light. Okay, let's pray. Lord, would you bless us as we go? Would you open our eyes, enlighten the eyes of our hearts? For those who are here exploring, would you meet them with tenderness and evidence? And Lord, for those of us here who are struggling through unbelief, would you enlighten our eyes? Would you show us who you are? Would you show us your love? Show us the sign of Jonah in our own hearts, we pray. In Jesus' name, amen.
Thank you for listening to Cornerstone West Los Angeles. For more information, please visit us on the web at cornerstonewla.org.